There we go. Okay, so as by way of introduction to these 7 ways to heat up a hard conversation, G.A. Quattrone, who deals with conflict resolution, talks about these 3 very broad areas that we should be aware of when we're dealing with topics that are leading to some level of disagreement with others. And so he says we often tend to categorize people, and he talks about 3 ways that we do that. So those would be 3 of the 7. So we tend to categorize people, and then we tend to characterize them based on the category that we put them in. And those 2 things very broadly sort of break down the conversation. And so third, what we have to do is practice what he calls correction. We have to correct ourselves and not categorize people and not characterize people in certain ways so that the conversation can go. So in terms of the topics themselves, these may deal more with the person that we're talking to rather than the topic or the argument itself. These would be some ways that we make an ad hominem argument here. So what we're going to do is look at these first 3 ways of categorizing people, what he calls prototyping, stereotyping, and making snap judgments. So number 1 of 7 here would be what the authors call prototyping the person. So they write, the more time it takes to elaborately interpret people and place them in nuanced mental categories, the more exhausted we become. So we use mental tools to cut corners. In the book, they talk about the fact that we are cognitive misers, that our brains get tired really quickly when we're in heated arguments. And so rather than continuing the hard work of, trying to really pay attention and have respect for this person, we use these next 3 things as a way to cut corners. So a prototype. This is their definition. A prototype is the clearest expression of a category. It's the basis on which all others in that category are judged. And it's usually based on one specific person. So in a number of different areas in our lives, there's a prototype. There's a particular person that sort of encapsulates all that's wrong with, whatever the category is. So their example here. Someone name and describe the worst teacher you ever had.
I had a teacher of Spanish when I was in high school, and he spent the majority of time outside smoking rather than teaching. He had me fill out and grade all the papers and do all the report cards. He gave me extra report cards so that I could change my report cards because I had skipped a lot of school and I needed to show that I didn't have absences. And he said, sure, you can take them. So he gave me blank report cards. And so that's pretty bad, right?
Mm-hmm. What was his name, Mr.
Lopez.
Mr. Lopez. Okay, so for you, Mr. Lopez would be a prototype of bad teachers.
No, he's just one example of one.
Okay, but a pretty bad one.
He was nice though. He liked me, but yes, he was not a good teacher.
Yeah.
He did not teach the subject.
Okay. All right, so Mr. Lopez, someone else have an example of just like the worst teacher you ever had?
I have one. Professor Pitts at Auburn University. He was, I've maybe mentioned him before, and I don't know if it was in this class or not, but he was definitely an alcoholic at the end of his tenure, kind of. And they gave him Algebra 2 class to teach, which was so beneath him because he was really very smart, that he never taught us one thing. He just
Oh,
would
no.
come in and put problems on the board and leave and not tell us anything about how to figure them out. And he finally got fired in the middle of the quarter. And we got this wonderful Professor Peoples that I absolutely adored that actually taught us. But the other guy, you could kind of understand it was, he hated having to teach that class. That was a put down to him.
Oh,
And he was pretty, I think he was drinking almost every day. And his whole front of his suit would have chalk dust on it because he would hit up against the chalkboard.
yeah.
And that's my memory of, and people called him Boozer Pitts because. So that's kind of my worst teacher.
Yeah. So Professor Pitts.
Professor Pitts was the Pitts.
Yeah. So what the authors suggest in their book is that when we have experiences like that, where there's one person that's particularly bad in a category, in this case, teachers, then anytime we encounter another person who performs poorly in that category, teachers, then as a mental shortcut, what we do is we think, oh, that's a Mr. Lopez. Oh, that's a Professor Pitts. And it's an easy way for us to categorize them, place them in a category, and then essentially to dismiss what they're saying, what they're doing. If we're in a disagreement with them over some legitimate topic, then categorizing them in that way based on this prototype makes it easier for us just to, not to listen to this guy. He's just like Mr. Lopez. This is another Professor Pitts. Does that make sense?
I think they would call, in psychology, they call that transfer.
Okay.
Somebody reminds me either positively or negatively of somebody else in my past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a fine line here between prototyping and stereotyping. And so for the authors of this book, prototyping is based largely on our experience with one specific person. And then that transfers then to everybody else in the category, right? And so what they suggest is that most of us do have these sort of negative prototypes for a lot of different categories. Republicans, Democrats, gun owners, Christians, LGBTQ, politicians, preachers, rich people, poor people, church leaders, parents. So let's just think about that for a moment. Can you think of another negative prototype that you have in another category that maybe at least at one time sort of shaped the way that you saw everyone else in that category?
This is stretching a little bit, and so I'm just trying to participate. But if someone is like overly tattooed to a point where they have tattoos on their face, on their forehead, on their neck, it just listen, I'm sorry to say, but the first impression is it takes me back a little bit. I understand it could be a very good person and one to speak with and to learn more about, but that's something that's just a visual, something that perhaps is a prototype.
Okay, so I think the authors of the book would say that would only be a prototype if you had a negative experience with a tattooed guy named Steve back in 1973, and he was really rude to you at a restaurant.
Well, and that would be true because I might say in
Yes.
in the 70s or in the 60s and the 70s. And again, perhaps my view of it was different then, but tattooed folks, were far and fewer between. Now that could be a gross generalization on my part. I could just recall that, and at least in the neighborhood that I grew up, those who had, generally were men. If they had tattoos, they were trying to make some sort of macho statement, at least I thought. And so perhaps that's where that was rooted.
Okay. Okay. So you had some negative experiences several years ago with some people in your neighborhood who had tattoos. And so that in a way that those few prototypes then might shape the way that you look at and interact with somebody who has a tattoo today.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much my experiences. It was just where they stood in the community. They were more on the other side of the law than perhaps the better side of the law.
Okay.
I don't know how to say that.
Yeah.
They were more troublesome than others.
Okay.
We were talking about teachers, and I don't think that I use Mr. Lopez to judge teachers, but the fact that he was a smoker. So I had a negative experience with him being a smoker because I felt like he was always outside taking smoking breaks, like in the middle of tests and everyone's cheating and he's out there taking a smoking break. So I think that that has caused me to judge smokers as not hard workers, possibly.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I think that I've taken that and made him a prototype of a smoker. And so I think it's caused me to judge people I work with who are smokers as,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. And so then the authors would say, let's say you and a smoker got into a conversation about abortion. Then because of this principle, you might be all the more likely to disregard their perspective or at least not to have a healthy conversation with them about it, because what you see when you see them is Mr. Lopez.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I have a difficulty with people I consider prosperity gospel and American Christian nationalism.
Okay.
And if I smell that, I immediately go, I don't like that person. Franklin Graham, Creflo Dollar, they make me want to go to the bathroom. Yeah.
So there's some specific examples of that perspective. You have some specific people in mind, and then that it sort of transfers over anytime you see that or hear that.
Yeah.
You think, oh, okay. Yeah. So I think what the authors of this book would say is that when we're engaged in a difficult conversation, a hard conversation with somebody, and we're feeling really negative towards that person, we might just ask ourselves, am I prototyping that person? And am I seeing them for who they really are, or are they just another, whoever comes to my mind there? So very related to this is stereotyping. So they say stereotypes are predictive statements we make based on an entire group. So these are impressions, often negative, that we have a group or a category based on a number of things. What we've learned in history, what we see on the news, what we read in novels. So unlike a prototype, that one bad person is how I see everybody who's in their category. A stereotype is how I see everyone in a group based on impressions given through a variety of avenues. So this is broader than a prototype. So for example, and I'm not trying to start any fights here. What would be some negative stereotypes that might be common about immigrants or about anti-abortionists?
Well, anti-abortionist. Well, immigrants, they're taking our jobs
Okay.
away. Anti-abortionist. Wow. I already have a negative connotation for them, so I think I'll keep that to myself. When I hear anti-abortionist, I hear somebody who will not allow me to have a different position.
Okay. Rigid,
Rigid, yep,
yeah,
closed-minded.
okay.
Well, and uncaring too.
Mhm,
Hmm.
mhm.
I think about immigrants, there's a feeling that they're just coming over to suck up bits of the country.
Yeah.
You want a handout?
Yeah,
Which, it's interesting how stereotypes can be very conflicting. Like with immigrants, they're taking our jobs and they want a handout. Right.
Well,
I mean, none of us really think these things, just saying.
No.
I mean, but a typical thing for an immigrant is to say that they stink,
Hmm.
or they're dirty.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm thinking what politicians call immigrants,
Mhm.
and they are not good words.
Yeah. People that are over anxious about immigrants love to find one that has done a crime.
Yeah.
Because then they use that as an example. See what I told you,
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you always know that's going to happen if some immigrant is charged with a crime.
Yeah. And so again, just to try to use the language that these authors use, I think they would say there's a case where we go try to find a prototype,
Right.
like an immigrant who's done something wrong, and then we say, oh, see, everybody in that category is this person right here.
Yeah.
Okay, so prototyping, prototyping might lead a person to say all Russians are like Putin. But stereotyping might lead us to say all Russians are
Killers.
Evil.
killers, evil. Yeah. Based on a number of different things. And this is stereotyping is what Jesus had to deal with in a lot of different ways. The statement in John 1:46, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, that's stereotyping in a negative way. So stereotyping leads us to assume the specific person before us shares the worst traits, and usually only the worst traits of the worst group, of the worst of the group to which they belong. So can you think about how would stereotypes get in the way of productive conversations around race, LGBTQ+, abortion, gun control? These are all divisive, heated topics. How would stereotypes get in the way of productive conversations about those things?
You might not listen to the person because you stereotyped them.
Okay, yeah, it's easy just to discount
Yeah.
the person, not even listen to them.
And also, I think it would keep you from finding ways to deal with certain problems like gun control, or, if you're so set in your ways, you're probably not going to be looking for some kind of solution.
Right, yeah, because stereotyping allows us to maintain our position and not have to do any work at all trying to find some common ground or
Right.
resolve the disagreement. Yeah. So again, I think the authors would say here, if you're having a conversation where there's disagreement with somebody and you're feeling particularly negative towards that person, you might ask yourself, how am I stereotyping them? And how is that keeping us from really having a healthy conversation about this hard topic? All right, the last one they call making snap judgments about the person. So if we put prototyping and stereotyping aside, just in general, the authors write, we're apt to make snap judgments about the person that we're engaged in this hard conversation with. So we quickly size up people, consciously and unconsciously, and we assign them personality traits. And the key is that these judgments happen instantaneously, and they're binary. That is, we meet someone, we get into a conversation with them about a hard topic, a divisive topic, and we're immediately thinking of binary categories. They're attractive, they're unattractive. They're funny, they're not. Well, they're a leader, they're a follower. They're artistic, they're uncreative, they're boisterous, they're reserved, they're committed, they're uncommitted, they're godly, they're lukewarm. Because again, these are cognitive shortcuts for us. Our brains don't want to have to do the work. So, and this has nothing to do about stereotypes or prototypes. It's just in general, we tend to make snap judgments about whoever we're talking to, including the person we're talking to about this divisive topic. So they say the danger with snap judgments is how much of our current context, mood, physical condition, or frame of reference can bias our judgments. And they cite some interesting research where if you put your participants in a happy, joyful context, and then you show them somebody who has a frowning face, they will make a positive judgment about that frowning face. But if you put them in a sad context, a gloomy context, and you show them a happy face, they'll make a negative judgment about that happy face. So our own context leads us to make snap judgments about the person in front of us.
Can I give you an example?
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you, and it's really weird. I just talked to somebody about this the other day. You all know I like wine. Let me get that out of the way. But I've had really good wine with people I didn't like, and it didn't taste that good.
Oh, interesting.
And I've had, it wasn't crappy wine, because I don't drink crappy wine, but it wasn't super good wine. And it would have been like being with Dina or being with Julia, and I had such a good time. And I go, man, that's one of the best wine I've ever had. It
That's
very much
interesting.
is related to who I'm with.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah,
I think that kind of fits with what you're talking
sure.
about.
Yeah.
I mean, like when I'm with Art, the wine always tastes delicious.
Really?
You're just trying to get another bottle, aren't you?
Can you think about some snap judgments that you tend to make, just in general, about people when you're in conversation with them?
Chris, I was going to say intelligent, attractive, things like that can, your sense, your immediate sense can kind of color your view of what they say.
Mhm. Okay, so these would be three things sort of related to the person that we're talking to about this difficult issue. And so the authors say this categorizing that we do and the characterization that comes with it, we need to learn to hold those things, to let go of them, and to be honest with ourselves and with the people that we're talking to about our perceptions of them, not just the topic, but of them. So they suggest three questions that can help us do that. These could be helpful questions to keep in mind in a divisive conversation. What do I believe about myself? Sometimes in the midst of a disagreement, we realize that we've accepted some things about ourselves that are not true. So take a moment to consider what you truly believe to be true about yourself. Because sometimes when we're in a heated conversation about a divisive topic, the other person may have said some things about us. They may have stereotyped us. They may have categorized us. And so it's helpful to stop and tell ourselves, I'm not who they are thinking that I am. Secondly, what do I believe about the person before me? So maybe in this divisive conversation, we've accepted some things about them that aren't really true. So this is where we try to name how we've prototyped them or stereotyped them or made snap judgments of them. And then the third question, what are we trying to do together? Consider what you might have in common in spite of the disagreement that you're having there. So they would say those are three questions that can help deal with those first three things that heat up a conversation. All right, number 4. The language that they use is called silver bulleting. Silver bulleting. Finding a particular verse that supports one's position and using it, this is a verse of scripture, using it as a silver bullet that not only ends all conversation, but also makes anyone who takes a contrary position into a person who denies the authority of Scripture. So just like categorizing someone is an expression of being a cognitive miser. So silver bulleting is similar. It's assuming that we don't really have to take into account the context of Scripture or the larger theological themes of Scripture. That we can use one silver bullet, one verse of text, and prove our point and be finished with the conversation that we have disagreement about. Can you think about some topics that might lend themselves to silver bulleting? And I just note that slavery itself was actually supported in churches by quoting small portions of Pauline texts about slavery that without any context seem to support slavery. Can you think about some topics today that get silver bulleted?
Well, you have LGBTQ up there, and that's certainly one that does.
Okay, so there's five or six sort of, sometimes they're called clobber passages that are pulled out in these conversations, and the sort of the sense is that resolves the conversation. There's no need to talk any further.
I'd say the position of women in church.
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah.
we've unlearned that over 20, 25 years here, but there was a time in which I knew specifically that Kendra could not be an elder. And today I would say that Kendra could. If she wanted to, and if the church called her to. But that's, and I still have friends who will say, you know, your church is not a true church because you guys have women in positions.
Yeah. So it's fairly easy to find one or two key verses there, and say, well, see, you can't do that without doing the harder work, the longer work of what does the whole of Scripture point to in this area. Of course, we might be thinking, well, how is the person I'm in disagreement with silver bulleting? But I think it's also important for us to think about, did I just silver bullet this conversation? Did I just shut it down because there's one particular text that I think anybody who reads that ought to know that what I'm saying about this is the way it is.
I think the death penalty is a silver bullet. I think if you're going to do the death penalty, I don't believe in it, but people use Old Testament passages
Sure.
to support the death penalty, but they stay away from all the other passages that talk about other things that would lessen their power position in life.
Yeah.
Therefore, the death penalty, because it's those people.
Okay. Yeah. So silver bulleting keeps us from having a deeper, nuanced conversation about what Scripture actually says about the topic that we're talking about. Number 5, use flamethrowers. These are words and phrases that trigger anger and inflame the conversation, generating heat rather than light. They are common terms that are used freely by members of your in-group. In fact, they're often shorthand for the beliefs of the other group. Can you think of some flamethrowers, words and phrases that trigger anger and inflame conversations today?
You got the big ones.
We got a pretty good list.
Yeah. I would say communist. That's a big one. That's a socialist,
Right.
but politically communist is thrown out a lot. by
Okay,
right-wing people for people who disagree with them.
yeah. And there's a lot, that carries a lot of baggage. That
Yeah.
word brings a lot with it into a conversation.
Probably even the word Christian.
Yeah, or evangelical,
Yeah.
even more.
Sorry,
I mean,
I just did it.
yeah. So, and I don't even know that it's not that we could never use these words. I mean, if you're talking about racism, the word racist is an important word in that conversation. But it's also about being aware of the emotional freight of some of the words and phrases that are part of these conversations. And too often what happens when we're having these conversations about divisive topics is that we lob them like a hand grenade into the conversation, and it shuts the conversation down.
Mhm.
Okay, number 6. So this is an interesting phrase, use fog machines. Use fog machines. Words and phrases that serve to confuse the participants in a conversation and obscure the issue that is really at stake. So they're different from flamethrowers in that they're not necessarily inflaming the conversation. They're similar to flamethrowers in that they're there to stall the conversation rather than to deepen it. So a fog machine would be any attempt in a conversation about a hard topic that basically, off into something else, so that we no longer have to talk about this right here.
Would that be the same thing as word salad?
Oh, can you say more about that?
Somebody talks so much that you wonder what the heck they're talking about.
Okay.
That's what I think of when I hear word salad.
Yeah. So there's so many layers to the conversation that you're no longer talking about what you were talking about, right?
But I like fog machine.
Yeah, I think it's a helpful image. The authors didn't flesh this out as much as I hoped that they might. I was trying to think of some times in my own life when I think I experienced what they're talking about here. Many years ago, I was preaching for a church, the University Church of Christ in New Mexico. We were talking about starting a small group ministry there for the very first time. And so we were having a leadership retreat, and we had read books and looked at different models, and we're looking at what that might mean for our congregation. And at one point, one of the leaders just cried out, "This is an agenda-driven meeting." And it felt like, okay, let's stop talking about that. Let's talk about how, either power hungry or poorly this conversation's been structured. And it just felt like okay, we just took a hard left here. Let's try to come back. So I felt like that was sort of a fog machine. Or early on in my ministry at Highland in Memphis, we were talking about stopping the Sunday night worship service, which was down to the faithful few. And a constant objection that one of the leaders had was, but how will people who miss communion in the morning be able to take it at night? Which in a lot of ways seems very tangential to. So is that really what are we talking about? The best way to provide communion to people who missed it in the morning? Well, there are probably other ways that we could do that. Well, I mean, I can't count the number of times I've been in a conversation about a difficult topic, and someone uses that, well, pretty slow. It sort of feels like a fog machine, Let's talk about all the things that might happen instead of talking about this particular topic right here. Kind of thought. Yeah, Julie.
I know I've experienced this quite a number of times, but people will throw out an argument that's not about the argument you're having, just because they know you will respond and then you get off topic.
Yeah, right.
I know of very few, a lot of very skilled people who do this.
There is an art to it, not that art does it, but there is an art. Yeah. So there's something to look out for in the conversation about a divisive topic. Was that a fog machine?
Mm.
And then the last one that they list are what they call tripwires. So these are hot button issues that may not correlate in a clear fashion with your other convictions or opinions. They're things that we accidentally stumble into, and they change the tone of the conversation. So they gave an example of a couple of individuals that come together to talk about a divisive topic, and just trying to warm up. One of them asked the other, well, what did you do on vacation? And something negative had happened during that vacation, and then that became sort of the focus of the conversation, which set a really negative tone for the conversation, and they never recovered from it. And so they called that a tripwire. It'd be difficult to anticipate it, but once it happened, both parties needed to say, "Oh wow, that sounds really terrible. I'm really sorry that happened. Maybe we should we postpone this conversation because it sounds like that was really hard, or at least find some way to address it."
I have a good example
Oh, yeah?
of that. So I'm doing the LST studying with Friendspeak.
Yeah.
And so the person I was doing it with, she had a terrible experience at school where her son had gone in and he had gotten in trouble. She was called in the office. I mean, it was just an incredibly stressful day. So we were starting our conversation and going to do the study, and I asked her, about her day and about her son in school. And so then that opened up that whole can of worms. And then from that moment on, she couldn't refocus.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
because it was so emotionally upsetting to her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these you can't really avoid these, but what the authors say is we should be aware that there are going to be tripwires in conversations and in conversations about divisive topics. So when we trip one, we should find a way to acknowledge it, to address it. And even if that means saying, why don't we pause this and let's come back at this, at another time when maybe we both have more resources to give to it.
I run into this at the hospital on occasion, and a tripwire with a family, stuff going on, and I'm trapped for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's in the context of my job, and I can't get out of it.
Right.
And I'm so freaking exhausted after that.
I bet.
Like, I don't want to see anybody else. So,
Yeah.
So that's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. You're dealing with folks who for whom there are a number of tripwires just right out there.
Especially around death.
Yeah.
Because people got all the stuff about the person dying, and you got the unseen battles that the family is. And if it comes out, people are going after each other, and I kind of go, "Oh, I need to get out of here."
Yeah. So I think that's helpful language to carry with us, so that when those things happen, we can say, okay, well, that was a tripwire, and that's okay. Let's deal with it right now, whatever ways is best. Okay, so those are the 7 for tonight, and we'll come back next Wednesday night and hit some more content from the book. Any closing thoughts or questions?
Thank you. It was great.
Very good. Good to see you guys online. Thanks for being with us.
Don't worry about that bottle, Art.
All right, fine. It ages with time, so it'll be a little time.